The worst thing my stepmother ever did wasn't tearing down the photos of my late mother. It was the way she smiled while doing it, looking me dead in the eye and saying it was just time for a fresh start. That hit me hard. I was only 14 when Chloe married my dad and moved into our house in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Austin. My mom had passed away 2 years prior, and the grief was still a heavy, suffocating blanket in our home. When Chloe came into the picture, she presented herself as a savior. She was charming, soft-spoken, and promised my dad she would give me the maternal guidance I was missing. Honestly, I wanted to believe her. I desperately needed a maternal figure, and seeing my dad finally smile again after 2 years of deep depression made me want to accept her. But the moment the wedding rings were on, the mask started to slip. It began with subtle changes that most people wouldn't even notice, but to an observant, grieving teenager, they felt like tectonic shifts. Chloe started rearranging the house. My mother's favorite paintings were moved to the basement. Her vintage armchair was replaced by a modern sectional. And then came the day with the photos. I walked into the living room after track practice at Westlake High and saw Chloe stacking my mom's framed pictures into a cardboard box. When I asked her what she was doing, she didn't flinch. She just gave me this calm, patronizing pat on the shoulder. She told me that keeping the past alive was preventing my dad from fully healing, and that if I truly loved him, I'd want him to move forward. That was her favorite weapon: gaslighting. She had this terrifying ability to twist her cruelty into acts of profound charity. I ran to my dad that night, sobbing, expecting him to defend my mother's memory. Instead, he looked exhausted. He sighed, rubbed his temples, and told me that Chloe was just trying to help us build a new life together. He said I needed to stop being so sensitive. I realized then that Chloe hadn't just moved into our house. She had completely rewired my father's brain. She had convinced him that my grief was actually behavioral rebellion. Over the next year, the emotional isolation only grew worse, especially when Chloe found out she was pregnant with my half-sister, Madison. Suddenly, I became a ghost in my own home. Everything revolved around the new baby, which I expected, but Chloe took it a step further. She used the baby to completely cut me out of the family dynamics. My achievements at school were met with silence, while Madison's tiniest milestones were treated like national holidays. By the time I was a senior, applying for colleges, the tension in the house was unbearable. I worked late shifts as a receptionist at a local dental clinic just to avoid going home. I was saving every penny because I knew deep down I was entirely on my own. Then, the acceptance letters arrived. I got into UT Austin, my absolute dream school. I remember holding the packet, my heart pounding with pure joy. I couldn't wait to show my dad. But when I walked into the kitchen, I overheard Chloe and my dad talking about our family finances. What I heard her say next completely changed my life. "We just can't afford it, David." Chloe's voice drifted through the kitchen doorway, smooth and entirely logical. With Madison starting private preschool next year and the rising property taxes, paying for Emily's housing and tuition at UT Austin is out of the question. She needs to commute to a community college and keep her job. I stood frozen in the hallway, the acceptance letter crinkling in my tightening grip. Something felt off about how quickly my dad agreed with her. He murmured a quiet response about wanting me to have the best, but Chloe shut it down instantly, reminding him of how sacrificing they both needed to be for the future of the family. Their family, not mine. I walked into the kitchen, keeping my face as blank as possible. I looked straight at my dad and told him I'd been accepted. He looked genuinely proud for a split second, but a sharp, pointed cleared throat from Chloe made his smile vanish. Before he could speak, Chloe stepped in, her face twisted into a mask of fake sympathy. She told me how proud they were, but that college was a luxury they couldn't fund right now. She actually had the nerve to suggest I take out massive student loans under my own name while living at home to pay them rent. I'm not gonna lie, a part of me wanted to scream, to break down and remind my dad that my mother had left a college fund for me. But I kept my composure. I knew that losing my temper would only give Chloe the ammunition she needed to prove I was unstable. Instead, I looked into the college fund myself the very next day. I logged into our family's online banking portal using the credentials I'd seen my dad use 100 times. What I discovered made my stomach drop. The account my mom had set up for me wasn't just low. It was completely empty. Over $30,000 had been systematically transferred out of that savings account over the past 3 years. Every single transfer was labeled as an investment transfer, moving the money directly into a joint account owned by my dad and Chloe. They hadn't just lacked the funds for my education, they had actively used my late mother's money to fund their new lifestyle, Madison's future, and Chloe's expensive home renovations. I sat at my desk in the dark, my hands shaking on the keyboard. The betrayal hit me so hard I could barely breathe. My dad had allowed this. He had signed off on erasing the one safety net my mother had left for me. At that point, I knew exactly what was happening. I wasn't just a stepdaughter Chloe didn't like. I was a financial inconvenience whose past they wanted to scrub away entirely. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I knew if I threw a tantrum, Chloe would gaslight my dad into believing the money was used for household expenses that benefited me too. I needed undeniable proof, and more importantly, I needed an exit strategy. I spent the next 2 months working double shifts at the dental clinic and secretly applying for financial aid, scholarships, and independent student status. I kept my head down, played the quiet, submissive stepdaughter, and let Chloe think she had won. It happened 2 weeks before the fall semester was set to begin. I had quietly secured a small grant and a work-study position that would just barely cover my tuition, planned to live with a roommate off campus, and move out without their financial help. But Chloe found out. I came home from a late shift to find my bedroom completely ransacked. My journals were pulled from under my mattress, my laptop was open on my desk, and Chloe was sitting in my desk chair, holding my financial aid award letter. She looked up at me, a cold, triumphant smirk on her face, and told me I wasn't going anywhere. "You really thought you could hide this from us, Emily?" Chloe asked, her voice dangerously quiet as she tapped the financial aid letter against her knee. "You lied to your father. You secretly applied for grants using our tax information without our permission. That's fraud." I stood in the doorway of my ruined bedroom, my heart pounding against my ribs, but I forced my expression to remain entirely frozen. I should have seen it sooner. I should have known she'd go digging through my room the second she suspected I was planning my exit. She stood up, walking toward me until she was just inches away. She told me that she had already spoken to my dad, and they agreed that since I was so eager to deceive the family, I couldn't be trusted on a college campus. Then she dropped the real bombshell. She said my dad was going to contact the university's financial aid office the next morning to inform them that our household income didn't qualify me for the grants I'd received, effectively canceling my enrollment. I looked past her to the doorway and saw my dad standing in the hall. He wouldn't even meet my eyes. He just looked at the floor, completely submissive to her will. Chloe had convinced him that my independence was a direct threat to their family's stability. Honestly, I was done. The sheer malice of trying to ruin my future just to keep me under her thumb and using me as a live-in babysitter for Madison made something click inside of me. The sadness vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. "I didn't commit fraud, Chloe," I said, my voice incredibly calm. "I applied as an independent student based on my own income from the clinic. And if Dad calls the university, I'll be forced to call the bank." Chloe laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. She asked me what a teenager could possibly do to a bank. I looked past her, straight at my father. I told him that I had downloaded the full audit trail of my mother's savings account. I told him I had the exact dates, times, and account numbers showing how $30,000 of my inheritance was transferred into Chloe's personal boutique business account. The color completely drained from my dad's face. He looked at Chloe, then back at me, his mouth opening but no sound coming out. Chloe's smirk instantly vanished. She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing into slits, and threatened that if I ever spoke about that money again, she would throw me out on the street that very night with absolutely nothing. I looked her dead in the eye, took a step back, and smiled. I told her she didn't have to throw me out. I pulled my duffel bag from the closet, which I had secretly packed days ago, and told them I was leaving right then. But what happened as I tried to walk down the stairs was even worse. Chloe grabbed the strap of my duffel bag, wrenching it off my shoulder so violently that I lost my footing. I managed to catch the handrail, my knuckles turning white as the bag crashed down the wooden steps, spilling my clothes across the foyer. "You aren't going anywhere until we see what else you stole from this house," Chloe hissed from the top of the stairs. My dad finally moved, rushing down to gather my things, but his touch felt like a betrayal in itself. He kept whispering for me to just calm down, to apologize to Chloe, and to stop making a scene. He was entirely pathetic. He was more terrified of Chloe's anger than he was of losing his own daughter. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I walked down the remaining stairs, knelt next to my dad, and calmly zipped the bag shut. I told him to keep his hands off my things. At that point, I knew exactly what was happening. If I stayed in that house for even one more hour, Chloe would find a way to make me look like the villain. She would call the police, claim I attacked her, or accuse me of theft just to ruin my record and destroy my chances at UT Austin. I walked out the front door into the humid Texas night, the heavy door slamming behind me. I didn't look back. I walked 3 miles to the apartment of my coworker from the dental clinic, Sarah, who had graciously offered me a place to stay until the dorms opened. The next morning, I woke up to 20 missed calls from my dad and a string of paragraphs from Chloe's number. She claimed that if I didn't return home and apologize for my disrespectful outburst, they would cut off my cell phone plan, take back the car I drove, which was technically in my dad's name, and make sure none of my extended family ever spoke to me again. I didn't reply. Instead, I spent the afternoon at the university's financial aid office, showing them the bank statements and explaining my situation. The administrator was incredibly sympathetic. Because I had documented proof of the financial abuse and my independent income, they finalized my housing and tuition assistance without requiring my dad's signature. If you've ever dealt with a toxic family dynamic and had to fight for your own future, drop a comment below. It helps to know we aren't alone. I thought I had finally escaped her reach and could focus on my classes. But 3 weeks later, right as I was settling into my dorm room in Austin, I received a certified letter in the mail from a local law firm. What I discovered inside completely changed my life. Chloe was suing me. Or rather, she had forced my dad to sign a civil lawsuit claiming that the $30,000 from my mother's account wasn't an inheritance at all. The letter stated that by downloading those banking records, I had violated federal privacy laws and committed digital theft. The lawsuit demanded that I return all copies of the financial statements, issue a formal written apology admitting to the theft, and sign an agreement waiving any future claims to my father's estate. If I didn't sign within 10 days, they were going to file the suit publicly. I sat on the edge of my twin-sized dorm bed, looking out at the beautiful UT Austin campus, feeling the walls closing in. But I didn't back down. I took the documents straight to the university's free legal aid office for students. I met with a sharp attorney named Marcus, who carefully reviewed the bank statements I had saved. As Marcus read through the logs, he realized that Chloe had routed my mother's stolen inheritance directly into her personal boutique's commercial account to write off her business losses. Because my dad had signed off on the transfers, Marcus flagged the file and quietly handed it over to the State Financial Crimes Unit. We didn't reply to Chloe's letter. We let the 10 days pass in complete silence. For the next 2 weeks, the silence from their end was deafening. But it was the calm before the storm. Chloe wasn't just waiting, she was actively preparing to destroy me. On a Tuesday afternoon, I received an email notification that shook me to my core. A local Texas news blog had received an anonymous tip about a university student under investigation for high-tech family theft. Chloe was leaking a twisted version of the story to the press to force the university to expel me before the state could even look at her records. My heart was racing. If the university panic reacted to the bad press, my scholarships would be frozen instantly. I called Marcus, panicking, realizing that Chloe was trying to completely erase my credibility before her own fraud came to light. Marcus told me to hold steady. He said the state prosecutors had already verified the bank trail and were wrapping up their paperwork. It was a race against time. If Chloe's smear campaign went live first, my reputation would be ruined before I could ever prove my innocence. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every hour felt like a day. I kept refreshing the local news sites, waiting for the headline that would crush my life. The next morning, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. It was my father. But what he told me next made my blood run cold. "Emily, please, you have to tell your lawyer to stop," my dad pleaded, his voice cracking with a panic I had never heard from him before. "The police are at Chloe's boutique right now. They're seizing her business computers. They have a warrant." I sat up in my bed, keeping my voice down to a dead whisper. I told him I had no control over what the state of Texas decided to do once fraud was uncovered. What Chloe hadn't realized when she launched her fake lawsuit was that she had triggered an avalanche she couldn't stop. Because she had routed my mother's stolen inheritance into her commercial account, she had committed major tax fraud and commingled funds. And because my dad's signature was on every single fraudulent transfer document, he wasn't just a bystander anymore. He was legally considered an accomplice. My dad was crying now, begging me to withdraw the statements, claiming that if Chloe went to jail and he lost his job, the bank would foreclose on the house. He actually asked me to take the blame to save his retirement and his reputation. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He wasn't calling because he was sorry for what they did to me. He was calling because the fire they started was finally burning down his own life. He had spent years watching Chloe emotionally abuse me and deplete my mother's legacy, and now he wanted me to sacrifice my future to protect his comfort. I told him that he should have thought about his family's stability before he helped his wife commit a crime. I hung up the phone. 6 months later, Chloe accepted a plea deal to avoid jail time. She had to pay heavy federal fines, shut down her business permanently, and sign a legally binding restitution agreement to pay back every single cent she had stolen. But my dad couldn't escape the consequences so easily. Because he was an accomplice to corporate tax fraud, his employer, a major accounting firm, immediately fired him for ethical violations. His professional license was suspended, and the legal fees forced him to sell the very house we had grown up in, the house he had allowed Chloe to strip of my mother's memories. The truth came out naturally through the rest of our extended family. When my aunts and uncles found out the full extent of the financial abuse and how my dad had tried to pressure me into taking the fall, they completely cut him off. He was left with nothing but the broken pieces of the life he chose over his own daughter. Subscribe if you enjoy emotional real-life stories. This final chapter proved that justice always finds its way. Today, I'm graduating from UT Austin with honors. My dad sent me a message last night, asking if he could attend the ceremony. I stared at the screen for a long time, thinking about the girl who used to hide in her room just to escape the toxicity of that house. I finally knew exactly what to say to him. I typed out a single sentence: "You can come, but you sit in the back and you sit alone." He didn't reply, but today, as I stood on the stage in my cap and gown, looking out at the massive crowd, I spotted him. He was sitting in the very last row of the stadium, looking small, tired, and completely isolated. He didn't look like the powerful, intimidating father who had turned his back on me. He looked like a stranger facing the reality of his own choices. Chloe wasn't there. She was legally barred from entering the campus grounds due to the terms of her probation. As my name was called and I walked toward the center of the stage, I didn't feel anger toward my father, nor did I feel pity. The emotional ties had been severed long ago. Instead, a sudden, beautiful memory rushed over me. I remembered sitting on the floor of our old living room when I was 10 years old, leaning against my mother's knees while she brushed my hair. She had looked at me in the mirror and said, "Emily, people will try to define you by their own limitations, but you carry a fire inside you. Never let anyone blow it out." For years, Chloe had tried to extinguish that fire. She had packed away my mother's photos, emptied my savings, and tried to strip me of my identity. My dad had stood by and watched her do it. But standing on that stage, holding my degree, I realized they hadn't destroyed my mother's legacy at all. Her legacy wasn't in the money, the furniture, or the old house. Her legacy was me. It was my resilience, my strength, and the fact that I had refused to break under their pressure. Exposing Chloe's lies and forcing my father to face the legal and social consequences of his betrayal wasn't just about financial justice. It was the ultimate emotional revenge. I didn't have to scream, I didn't have to resort to their low level, and I didn't have to break the law. I just had to stand firmly in the truth and let their own greed destroy them. I had finally won. I had protected my mother's memory, and more importantly, I had protected my own future. Looking back at everything I went through in that house, I realized the most important lesson of all: your self-worth is entirely non-negotiable. When people treat you like an inconvenience or try to manipulate your reality, you don't have to change to fit their toxic narrative. You don't need the approval of people who are committed to misunderstanding you. True healing begins the exact moment you choose to walk away and protect your own peace, no matter how scary it feels to step out into the dark. If you've ever gone through something like this, or if you know someone who has, please share your thoughts in the comments below. To support these real-life stories, make sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more emotional journeys. Thank you for watching.